Our focus today will be the Vlookup, the Hlookup, and how to use range names for greater efficiency. The Vlookup function, or the vertical lookup function, looks for a search value in the first column of a separate list called a lookup table. When it finds that value, it returns a corresponding value from that row. It's a very useful and frequently used function. Okay, in our example, we have a list that includes employee ID, salary, and bonus. And what we'd like to do is bring in the employee name, which is missing, from a separate table. So if I can just come over here and show you that separate table. The separate table has the employee ID and the name. And what we're going to be doing is using the Vlookup to look for the person's employee ID and return the corresponding name. So the way that we do this is by using the Vlookup. The Vlookup syntax is that it takes 3 arguments. It needs the search value, what it is that you're looking for. In our case, that's going to be the employee ID. It needs the lookup table, which is over here on a separate sheet within the same workbook. So it could be on the same sheet, a separate sheet. As long as it's in the same workbook, then that lookup table can be used. And then it also needs a third piece, the column index. Now, people get confused with the column index. They believe that it's related to what actual column in your Excel spreadsheet that information is in. That's not actually true. The column index is what column within the lookup table. So if I wanted to return the employee name, that would be the second column of the lookup table, regardless of where it is sitting on that sheet. So just keep that in mind. So another thing to keep in mind, we just highly recommend that you take this list and name it. Take the cells of this list and give them a name. That makes it easier for you to enter your initial formula, and it also makes it easier to copy this formula down to the rest of the employees. So the simplest way to name a range is to first select the cells. So I'm just clicking and dragging to highlight the cells. And I'm including those titles at the top. And here's your name box over on the left side of the formula bar. So here's where we'll be putting in the formula, but a little bit to the left is the name box. As you hover over it, you'll see a little tooltip that tells you what it's called. And what you're going to do is click on that. So right now it says C2. I'm going to click in there, and I'm going to type the name that I want to give it. And in this example, I'm just going to call it names. So you type in the name you would like to give it and press the Enter key. And now I can refer to that lookup table by the name I gave it, whatever that may be. You could also use it for navigation purposes. So if you're on some other sheet and you want to go check out that group of cells, you can use that drop down, give it a click, and it'll take you to that group of cells that you've named, in this case, names. Another little thing to keep in mind, in this basic example, I'm going to be looking for the employee ID, and it's going to return the name of the individual associated with that employee ID. In order for it to work, again, there's multiple ways of using this function, but in this simple way, what we want to do is make sure that the first column of our lookup table is in ascending order. Okay? If it's not, and we can show you that in a minute, the results are going to be incorrect. All right, so just coming back to this, I'm going to look for the employee ID down the first column of my lookup table, which is sorted in ascending order, and I'm going to tell it to return the associated value it sees in that second column of the lookup table. So in that case, I am going to be using column index number 2. I just labeled these so that we would be clear on what that is all about. So coming over here to the Vlookup report sheet, I'm clicking in the cell F10, which is where I want my formula to go, and I'm going to go ahead and type this out. It's just going to be equal Vlookup, open paren. The lookup value is the employee ID. So each employee has their own unique ID, so it's a great value here to perform the search on. So I'm giving that a click, and it writes it into the formula, so you can see equal Vlookup there on the formula bar, G10. I separate my arguments with a comma, so I'm typing in a comma, and now it wants the lookup table. I created a named range for that lookup table, so I can just type that named range in here. And as you start to type, you'll get that little pop-up. That little pop-up is helpful if it has a long name or you're feeling like you don't want to do a lot of typing. You can certainly just double-click that, and it will finish writing that named range into your formula. Okay, mine's a short name. I'm just going to finish typing there and ignore that tag for a minute. And I'm going on now to the third argument. The third argument is, well, what column in the lookup table is it? It is the second column of the lookup table. So that column index is a 2. That's it. That's all I need. I'm closing the paren. I'm pressing the enter key. And it is finding this employee ID, 3189987, by going down the first column of the lookup table. When it finds it, it stops processing for a moment and then comes over to whatever column index you are asking it to retrieve. I said retrieve what's in column index number 2 and what's in column index number 2, but the name. So it is writing Andy Bernard in there, which is the associated name for that employee ID. I'd like to copy that down to the rest of my employees. And since I used the range name in that formula up there, I can just double click or drag the fill handle and it will go ahead and add that formula to the rest of the employees. So remember, the original one was looking for the search value in cell G10, and it went ahead and used that named range, which we called names, and it brought in column index number 2. And then when I copied it down, it adjusted where it finds the search value to the next row, but it didn't change anything else. So no further adjustments. If I did not name this range, it would adjust the lookup table by one cell as well. So that's why using the name in there keeps it absolute, keeps it looking in the same cells as the lookup table all the way down my list. Okay. So again, the VLOOKUP, great way to perform a vertical lookup, which will go down the first column of a lookup table, find a value, and return a corresponding value from that row. The Hlookup function, or the horizontal lookup function, looks for a search value in the first row of a separate list called the lookup table. When it finds the value, it returns a corresponding value from that column. So in this example, we'll be using an Hlookup to find the item number that's being ordered on this invoice. Look for that item number across the first row of a separate lookup table. And when it finds that lookup value, it's going to return the description in column B. And then we'll do this again to bring in the unit price into column C. So we have, I'm just scrolling up so we can see the arguments or the syntax that we'll be using in this particular formula. So we'll be using the Hlookup, which has the same arguments as our VLOOKUP. It just will work in situations where the lookup table is oriented to be horizontal. Okay, but other than that, it is the same arguments in the same order. So it needs the search value, it needs the name of the lookup table, and it needs what row of the lookup table. So in the first example, we'll be bringing in the description. The description is in the second row of the lookup table, so the row index is going to be a 2. When we want to bring in the unit price, we'll be using row index 3 because that's the third row of the lookup table. To make this function a little bit easier to work with and certainly easier to copy, I'm going to select the cells of the lookup table, and in the name box, I'm just going to give it a name. I'm going to call this products. So type in your name, press enter, and then it's always a good idea to check to make sure it actually worked. If you don't press the enter key, it will not work. But if I give that a click, it should select the correct cells, in this case, the cells of my lookup table. So let's go ahead now, with that step out of the way, we can go ahead and use the lookup function. I think I'll just leave it about like this. And I'm clicking into cell B18 where I want the description. And I'm going to start off with my equal sign, Hlookup, open paren. It wants the lookup value. So the lookup value in this case is going to be the part or the item number, followed by a comma. Then it needs the lookup table, which we named products. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in. Again, I can pick it off of the little luggage tag that shows up as I begin typing, or just type it on my own. And then again, in this basic example, I just want to tell it, well, what row of the lookup table contains the information I want to bring in, and the description is in the second row of the lookup table, so my row index is a 2. It's good form to close that paren at the end, press the enter key, and then just taking a look, it's bringing across the 10 terabit hard disk, which is the proper description for item number 1. So I can copy that down. You can double click that fill handle or click and drag, and it will populate the rest of them. Again, looking for the item number in column A, always looking in the lookup table called products, so the same cell, and looking to bring in the description, which is in the second row of the lookup table. Now, just a secondary example here, we are going to bring in the unit price. So once more, it's the Hlookup equal Hlookup open paren. The search value or the lookup value is in cell A18, so I'm clicking on that, followed by a comma. The name of the table that I want to look this up in is called products, just like in our previous example, of course. The only thing different here is that I want the information from the third row of the lookup table because I want to bring in that price. So closing the paren at the end, pressing the enter key, and in the Hlookup, just verifying, in the lookup table, excuse me, just verifying that item number 1 has a price of $300. And that's correct. So I can copy that down, and it will populate the remaining prices. So perfect example of this, you have a price list, a schedule, something along those lines on a separate sheet, and you want to bring in information from that separate sheet based on whatever that lookup value may be. Just also want to mention, just like in our VLOOKUP, the first row of my lookup table is in ascending order, okay? If it wasn't in ascending order, then my lookups would not work properly the way I've written them here in this example. So please keep that in mind. Just like in our VLOOKUPs, where the first column of the lookup table needs to be in ascending order, the same is true here. So you can see the sequence there, easy to follow. If it's not in ascending order, then it will give me an error. I won't get the right answers there as a result. And that is a quick introduction to our vertical and horizontal lookups in Excel, and of course using named range to work with them effectively. And that's it for today's lesson. Thanks, and hope to see you again soon.